guys know who the Hawk Tuah girl is? Is that someone that people know? Like, she fascinates me. I guess she fascinates everyone. She suddenly has 2 million followers. Like, how many people have seen the video? Some, no one's copying to having watched it.
What's one move in bed that makes a man go crazy every time?
Oh, you gotta give him that Hawk Tuah and spit on that thing. You get me?
I don't get you. I think you gotta demonstrate.
Hawk Tuah and spit on it. Spit on it.
They're two Southern girls, and there's an interesting sexual, racial dynamic going on in which they're trying to say the right thing, but the Hawk Tuah girl just breaks through that. And it's very WWE, it's very Trump. I do feel like during the election, when Biden was still absurdly campaigning, he, there was no Hawk Tuah element to it at all. He would almost invariably say the wrong thing with almost comic predictability. And I think it goes to Ben's point of like the people, these millennials or Zoomers who are advising Kamala, who's in her late 50s. She doesn't know this stuff, but that they get how Kamala is Brett changes everything. That Charlie XCX's green has replaced the Barbie pink.
David Shields is one of the characters in the upcoming documentary, The Last Election, which is being re-edited now. The film ends with a reflection on the generations of leftists who attended the conventions. Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, and Zoomer. After some test screenings, I found that Shields, as a younger boomer whose literary career began in the 80s, is the most difficult character in the film for younger audiences to relate to. As a Gen Xer, I was surprised that Shields should be an enigma, and I feel compelled to explain him, to reveal the secret he holds, and how his writings were avant-garde, even radical, back in the day. To younger audiences, Shields came across as out of touch when he said that Kamala Harris's embrace of Charlie XCX's Brat Summer meant that green had replaced Barbie's pink. When he waxed poetic about the Hawk Tuah girl and her unexpected virality, insisted that Trump be understood as a practitioner of WWE-style kayfabe, his observations seemed trivial when compared to Benjamin Studebaker's millennial complaints about the lack of good middle-class jobs, student loan debt, and the high price of housing. Even when compared to Wyatt Berlin's direct embrace of Trump as a figure representing the radical ideology of middle America, Shields, who had written over 25 books and whose bestseller, Reality Hunger, was described as a critically important manifesto and a closed fist by the Los Angeles Times, seemed wanting. But Shields' observations aren't just centrist Democratic Party talking points. And if younger people want to understand why or how he could go from holding up a closed fist against the ideology of the Obama era to celebrating Kamala Harris's debate skills, we have to rewind. Rewind to the year 1985, specifically to the moment when the art noise group Negativland released a recording of their Bay Area public radio program, Over the Edge, as an album entitled JamCon 84.
Signs so big they're never out of view. Sounds surround. Box talk, box talk.
This is CBS.
This is PBS. This is ABC.
This is the National Broadcasting Company.
These are a few lines from the forthcoming album by Negativland, but they suggest much more than that. As awareness of how the media environment we occupy affects and directs our inner life grows, some resist, some resist, some resist.
Now I ask you simply, What is your mission here?
Instrument failure caused navigational error.
This is CBS.
Panasonic, just slightly ahead of our time.
I cut my teeth on quality rock and roll, too. That makes me a foghead.
Morning, I am here with Classic Rock. I'm K-Fog.
This is Scoop, and if you don't like the news, go out and make some of your own.
Then there is a truth here that remains unspoken.
You've been told everything. There's nothing else to say.
Some resist.
Psychedelic supper.
Bonnie Simmons at the Supper House on K-Fog.
You have a remarkable mouth.
Culture jamming was an idea that had a French corollary 28 years earlier, when a member of the Letterist International, a radical leftist sect that had split off from the avant-garde poetry collective known as the Letterist movement, coined the term and developed the strategy of détournement. But first, more context. The Letterists, picking up from where the Surrealists and Dadaists had left off and responding to the Second World War, wanted to reinvent art. The old forms, they said, were exhausted, and the Letterist leader Isidore Izu wanted to take a sledgehammer to poetry, to cut the piano wires and distort the melodies that made up the soundtrack of Western civilization. In the Letterist Manifesto, he wrote, "The word is the first stereotype. What a difference between the organism and the sources. Notions, what an inherited dictionary. Tarzan learns in his father's book to call tigers cats, naming the unknown by the forever. The translated word does not express. The rigidity of forms impedes their transmission. These words are so heavy that the flow fails to carry them. Temperaments die before arriving at the goal. No word is capable of carrying the impulses one wants to send with it." The Letterists would smash words to pieces and then work with the rubble, starting with the smallest unit of communication and meaning with the letter. They would begin again and recreate the world.
And that's a complete letter? Yeah.
Debord's Letterist International, however, wanted to go further. Izu was too precious, hermetically sealed off from the world of everyday life. A literal man of letters, Izu was keeping his movement contained within the confines of a small poetry scene, small poetry journals, reducing the task of revolution to the level of a word jumble or a crossword puzzle. D. Debord's splinter group, the Letterist International, aimed to confront the reality of daily life and hit society where it mattered, right at the center and in the most fundamental way imaginable. The new Letterists would not target words, but people, and not just any people, but famous people. The turn from words to celebrity culture began in 1952, when Charlie Chaplin came to Paris to promote his film Limelight. The Letterist faction led by Debord was there to greet him when he arrived at the Hotel Ritz on the Place Vendôme. Rather than applauding him and, like the rest of the French left, celebrating his humanism, the Letterists distributed a pamphlet of denunciation. Entitled "No More Flat Feet," the screed claimed that the comedic actor was an emotional blackmailer and a master singer of misfortune. It called for all idols, even matinee idols, to be smashed. 32 years earlier, in 1920, when Chaplin was known for short films such as The Tramp, The Floorwalker, and The Immigrant, the Dadaist provocateur Tristan Tzara had promoted the second ever Dadaist event, a performance of absurdity and offense, by advertising that Chaplin would be amongst the performers. Tzara drew a crowd on a false promise, and according to the academic Jennifer Wilde, used the economic power of the Hollywood star system to promote his own revolutionary or at least countercultural art product. The Little Tramp had been considered a fellow traveler of the avant-garde. The Hollywood film had been an object of fascination for the 20th century avant-garde from the start. To denounce Chaplin was almost to side with Hoover and the FBI. To disrupt his marketing campaign was to turn against the international milieu, which is precisely what Debord aimed to do. He wanted to create a scandal, and he did. Isidore Izu put out a statement denouncing the denunciation, which in turn led Debord to renounce Izu. The group split in half, roughly, and the New Letterist International struck out on its own. Their first publication contained an essay that formalized a technique they'd used on Chaplin. The technique was called détournement, a process whereby the ascetic of state or corporate power, the formal techniques deployed by a culture industry aimed at total domination of society, would be turned against itself.
Hi, I'm Teen Talk Barbie, the spokesdoll for the BLO. That stands for the Barbie Liberation Organization. We're an international group of children's toys that are revolting against the companies that made us.
This little-known faction of underground toy terrorists is waging a video war, claiming responsibility for the sex change operations. Their mission? To wipe out gender stereotypes.
Though we can't have a totally new voice, we can switch with G.I. Joe and other toys for boys. Now we say things like this.
Dead men tell no tales. Troops, attack!
Debord turned the letterists on their head. Avant-garde artists would no longer seek to be innovative or novel. They would not seek to build a new art from the ground up, but would instead go to war on existing art, on the art of the past and the present both. They claimed that the productive forces of the new life necessitated a civil war against what would later be called the spectacle, a war on a culture that produced art that could no longer be justified, either in terms of progress or even as a compensation for the general misery that defined the post-war era. David Shields was born in the same year that Debord and Woolman wrote about détournement, but something fundamental changed in the more than half-century between his birth and the publication of his book, Reality Hunger. The need for a new form of art that could be justified against and through the reality of industrial society was still pressing, but the political character of Debord's project was lost. When David wrote his own manifesto and got it published by Knopf, it would be fair to say that he had stepped back from the Situationists, returned to letterism, an apolitical movement that believed that art could be redeemed from within the art world, even if that redemption appeared as a civil war within it. In his book, Reality Hunger, David wrote, "What is a fact? What is a lie for that matter? What exactly constitutes an essay, or a story, or a poem, or even an experience? What happens when we can no longer freeze the shifting phantasmagoria that is our actual experience?" By 2010, the aim of transforming society and the ambition of creating something new had been forgotten. But the urge to escape from unreality, from cliches, and from the dead weight of facts that did not capture reality was still palpable. The need to break the confines of the established frame gave Shields permission to plagiarize Debord's call for plagiarism. It was, Shields believed, what was required if there were to be an art adequate to the then still new 21st century. But by 2024, and with the publication of his book, How We Got Here, Shields no longer felt so confident about the technique he championed 15 years earlier.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life, and about Nietzsche's both fear and exhilaration at what might come next. And we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
When it comes to great stakes, I've just raised the stakes. The Sharper Image is one of my favorite stores with fantastic products of all kinds. That's why I'm thrilled they agree with me. Trump steaks are the world's greatest steaks, and I mean that in every sense of the word.
I would say Trump's ascendancy is testament to his ability to actually be closer to being a realist than his opponents.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's like he read Reality Hunger 100 times and then flipped it upside down, translated into Turkish, and hired Vladislav Surkov to write everything that he ever did. He could not be the more perfect Reality Hunger president.
Vladislav Surkov is Vladimir Putin's former aide and advisor. If you're living in one of the Five Eyes nations and his name sounds familiar, it is most likely because you've watched the Adam Curtis film Hypernormalization, a documentary that was originally broadcast on the BBC just before the American election of 2016.
But in Russia, there was a group of men who had seen how this very lack of belief in politics and dark uncertainty about the future could work to their advantage. What they had done was turn politics into a strange theatre, where nobody knew what was true or what was fake any longer. They were called political technologists, and they were the key figures behind President Putin. They had kept him in power, unchallenged, for 15 years. But then a technologist emerged who went much further, and his ideas would become central to Putin's grip on power. He was called Vladislav Surkov. Surkov came originally from the theatre world, and those who have studied his career say that what he did was take avant-garde ideas from the theatre and bring them into the heart of politics. Surkov's aim was not just to manipulate people, but to go deeper and play with and undermine their very perception of the world, so they are never sure what is really happening. Surkov turned Russian politics into a bewildering, constantly changing piece of theatre. He used Kremlin money to sponsor all kinds of groups, from mass anti-fascist youth organisations to the very opposite, neo-Nazi skinheads, and liberal human rights groups who then attacked the government. Surkov even backed whole political parties that were opposed to President Putin. But the key thing was that Surkov then let it be known that this was what he was doing, which meant that no one was sure what was real or what was fake in modern Russia. As one journalist put it, it's a strategy of power that keeps any opposition constantly confused, a ceaseless shape-shifting that is unstoppable because it is indefinable.
Along with being trained in avant-garde theater, Vladislav Surkov is also a science fiction writer. In 2014, while still working for Putin, he published a short story called Without Sky, under his pseudonym. It was a story about how the rural people of Russia, the village people, lived without a sky and had to travel to the city in order to see the moon or the stars. A far future speculation, Surkov's tale explained how innovations in aerial combat and the expansion of warfare to new domains, the transformation of wars fought by two sides into battles of all against all, had altered what was visible outside of the cities. The skies over villages were always full of fighter jets and the drifting propaganda leaflets all sides spewed in an effort to maintain control. And so the rural people had to make their own way into the cities in order to get a view of the world beyond two dimensions, beyond friend and enemy, beyond yes and no. The irony of the story, the twist, is that the new forms of warfare, the forever wars that obscured reality, were the products of the expansive three-dimensional understandings that the city people developed. And by allowing the villagers to visit the cities and view the sky, the city people were setting the stage for the air war to spread and clog up their own understanding with constant gunfire, smoke, gas, and propaganda. Vladislav Surkov recuperated Brecht's alienation effect. He instrumentalized the slick confusion and ironic kitsch of postmodernism. He transformed the self-referential and critical techniques of metafictional writers such as Jerzy Kosinski and John Barth into techniques of control. So for Shields, the question in this moment is, how do we find ways to present reality so readers and moviegoers can at least momentarily escape from the totalizing unreality of Trump? What he's hoping to discover are aesthetic and cultural movements and moments that reflect something authentic and real, something beyond what De Boer would call the spectacle.
Do you guys know who the Hawk Tuah girl is? Is that someone that people know?
What Shields is fascinated by is how unrefined and crass content manages to address social reality, while the techniques lifted from the old avant-garde are deployed in the service of official forms of violence and power.
Oh, well, this is kind of boring, but how many, like, this picture, it just looks exactly like a JMW Turner painting to me. You know, this one here. I mean, it's so ravishingly beautiful. And I'm basically trying to point out, I guess in a way you could argue it's sort of a polemical book or a dogmatic book, but I'm also trying to argue these pictures are truly beautiful. Then I'm trying to understand and undermine how this isn't journalism, this is propaganda. And I'm basically saying these pictures are, as the phrase goes, carrying water for Dick Cheney and George Bush, in my view, to promote the war. There's a wonderful Gerhard Richter, you know, I don't know if you know him, the German painter and photographer, and a lot of what he tries to convey is violence through a blurred image, that how the mechanization of violence through, you know, he's German, a lot of it's about extermination and concentration camps, at least obliquely, and the blur somehow conveys that.
In his 1954 essay, The Essay as Form, Adorno complained that whenever philosophy imagines that by borrowing from literature it can abolish objectified thought and its history, and even hopes that being itself will speak, it starts to turn into a washed-out cultural babble. Its aesthetic element consists merely of watered-down, second-hand reminiscences of Hölderlin or Expressionism, or perhaps Jugendstil, because no thought can entrust itself as absolutely and blindly to language. Adorno is pointing out how, by the 50s, the musicality of Hölderlin's poems, the idiosyncratic imagery of Expressionist writers, and the decorative ornamentations of Art Nouveau had been taken up by hacks and propagandists. Likewise, Shields points out that the New York Times photographers cribbed from fine art in order to justify and naturalize wars and war crimes. Gerhard Richter painted reproductions of photographs, official photographs lifted from war photographers in World War II, police photographers, and newspapers. He would blur distinctions in the frame in an effort to undermine the original photo's authority and highlight the difficulty of artistic representation under the reign of a consumer culture. So when Shields points out how the New York Times deployed Richter's blur to aestheticize the newspaper of records from photos from the invaded Iraq, he is attempting to expose the history of the aesthetic choice that the Times makes invisible, that the Times reifies. Why does Shields claim that leaning into transgression with a fuck you attitude is politically necessary today? What is the reality that Shields thinks that the Hawk Tuah girl is capturing that the more educated, self-reflective, informed, and therefore timid members of the political class completely miss?
Could be Trump. Yeah. Trump. Oh yeah. Trump. Could be Trump. Yeah. Trump. Oh yeah. Trump. Could be Trump. Yeah. Trump. Oh yeah. Trump. Could be Trump. Yeah. Trump. Oh yeah.
How does Trump know to say that? I'm obsessed with that idea. He hasn't read Picasso or Breton. He doesn't need to. Like, that to me is the $6 billion question. How does Trump first of all, how does he get away with it? And how does he know to say that? I literally don't get it. Like, everyone else would apologize. They wouldn't say it. It's like he absorbed all of 20th century late 19th century, 20th century, 21st century, postmodern literature, deconstruction, surrealism, and he embodies it with a kind of businessman's genius. I like, that's it for me. All of my heart, in a way, is with Trump's transgressiveness. But, you know, maybe because I'm just the child of two lefty politicians, and I just, you know, I'm just going to pull the lever for Kamala, and I just, you know, like, on some very boring things, I just think her positions on, like, gun control or abortion or whatever are just closer to mine.
Part 2 of this Critical Cuts video will be available on Patreon today, and then for free on this YouTube channel next week. We'll explore how the last Marxist, Chris Catrone, agrees with the former Marxist, James Hartfield, who claimed that neither the working class nor capitalism continues to exist. Did postmodernism deliver a post-class, post-worker world after all? We'll also discover why Mark Fisher longed to drop acid, and just how, after Fisher's death, acid communism was quickly recuperated into acid Corbynism. And finally, my son Noah and I discuss if it might be sensible to abandon systematizing our understanding of the world, and instead we attempt to find something useful in the works of Friedrich Nietzsche. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.